Hey, welcome back to the Sty Shack. um, okay, time for another Sty story. Holy smokes, they're getting up there. I think I got 80 of them or so in the playlist on the channel. I think the day will come there'll be a couple hundred or more. But we keep telling them. As long as you keep listening to them, Style keep telling them. Okay, so this one kind of came from a suggestion from one of my viewers, Joe Cook. He asked if I would do some rabbit hunting stories. I've got a couple, and I've still got them on my list. Now, this one is a hunting story that involves a rabbit. It's not hunting the rabbit, it's using the rabbit to hunt. Now, before I get deep into this story, the story kind of has a cruel, kind of a not so nice issue that occurs in the story. So if you have small children watching, maybe this story, it may not be suitable for them. So you may want to watch this first and then decide if you want to allow your young children to watch this story. But it's a fact of life. It's something that happened, and it involves a rabbit. So before I get started on this, I'm going to say, for those of you that haven't subscribed, please do hit the subscribe button. If you want to keep seeing Sty stories, hit the bell so you're notified whenever I'm posting something. We'll get past that garbage. We'll get on with the Sty story. Hey, this one is the rabbit call that just wouldn't quit. Okay, when I lived out in northwestern Montana, one thing we didn't have a shortage of was coyotes. Coyotes everywhere. Well, this buddy of mine out there, George was his name. He's kind of a character. I mean, a real character. An unusual fella. But George, he just did things so unconventionally. And him and I were talking one day, and I told him, I said, we got so many coyotes up by our camp. I said, they're driving me nuts. I said, they're harassing the dogs constantly. They're all night long. They're coming around the cabin and just howling all night long. Oh, excuse me. Yipping and screeching. You know how coyotes can be. And he says, well, why don't you shoot a bunch? And I said, well, they're pretty wise. I said, they're wise to me. I did manage to shoot a couple. But after that, they don't want it. Every time they'd hear that cabin door, they're gone, and they're quiet. 10 minutes after you close the cabin door, they're back at it again. He said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll come up there, and he says, you got that one nice big meadow by your place. He says, we can set up on a rise looking down into that meadow. And he says, I got the perfect coyote call. I said, well, okay. And he says, well, between the two of us, we should be able to clear them coyotes out of there. I said, well, okay, fine. So we picked a night. He shows up, and he's got a little, I'm sure you've seen him, little plastic dog carrier, portable dog carrier, but a small one that you would carry like a little lap dog, And he grabbed his rifle out of the back of his Jeep and this little dog carrier, and he says, come on, let's head up on that hill over here. We went up on the hill, and the sun was just setting. And he says, we'll get all set up. And he said, and give it a couple hours and we'll be able to call some coyotes in. Well, we got all set up. We kind of built ourselves a little blind out of some old logs that were laying around in the woods there. And we're behind that blind. And I said, what's with the dog carrier? You got your coyote call in there? Now, what I expected was this is a modern electronic coyote call with a speaker, and basically it's a tape player or a digital. Well, back then we didn't have digital. I'm sorry, but we just didn't. It was usually tape driven, use a cassette tape. And it would have like wounded animal sounds, like an animal that is hurt or injured. Well, he picks that carrier up and he says, look in there. And I looked in there, and inside that carrier is this big black and white fuzzy bunny, a rabbit. And I go, what are you doing? I said, we're not going to tie that rabbit up out in that clearing, are we, for them coyotes to tear up? He goes, oh, no. He says, if them coyotes got that rabbit, he said, I'd be in a heap of trouble. I said, you would be in a heap of trouble, huh? And he goes, well, yeah, it's my sister's rabbit. He said, she don't know that I got it. He said, I've got to get this rabbit back to her by morning, because he said, she's spending the night with a girlfriend, and if she gets home tomorrow and doesn't find her rabbit, I'm in a heap of trouble. Okay. I said, well, then how in the world is this rabbit going to help us get coyotes? He says, you just wait and see. So we just sat back and relaxed for an hour or two. And then we could hear that pack of coyotes yipping. Not too far off in the distance either. Now where we were set up, we're looking down into this meadow. And off to the north of us was where the cabin sat. Probably less than a quarter of a mile. So we're sitting there. And we could hear that pack of coyotes moving in. And we could tell they were close to that meadow. But they're not coming out into that meadow. Well, I think the reason they wouldn't come out in the meadow is because that's where my big dog that I had, he would run down in that meadow and chase them coyotes all over the place. So they got to the point where they just didn't come into the meadow itself, because they knew if he was out and about that he'd be coming down there to try to tear them up. And that's one thing, that dumb dog wasn't afraid of no pack of coyotes. So now we can hear them. They're on the wood line, right on the edge of the meadow. George says, get your rifle ready. Okay. Now we couldn't have picked a better night. Full moon, just bright outside. I was able to shoot with iron sights that night because it was so bright from that full moon right over the top of that meadow. George reaches in that little doggy kennel, pulls that big bunny out, and he's petting that bunny, and I go, George, I don't like there's something about this that's just, and all of a sudden that bunny's screeching. It's screeching and screeching. And I look, and he's got that bunny by the tail. And he's twisting that bunny's tail. And the thing's screeching. And those coyotes went absolutely nuts. They went nuts. And they come running out into that meadow. I proceeded to shoot. Put a couple of them down. They ran back in the woods. George is still petting the bunny. And he goes, "You want to make the bunny squeal and then I'll shoot a couple?" I said, "No, I'm not doing that to that poor rabbit. There's no way I'm doing that to that poor rabbit." I said, "I can't believe you're doing that." I said, "It sure does draw the coyotes in, though, but I can't believe you're doing that." And he says, "Oh, just shut up and get ready to shoot again. I bet you I can get them to come right back into that clear cut." Well, there's a couple of them laying out there dead. I thought they're not going to come back around their dead buddies. George took that bunny by the tail again, twisted. That bunny started screeching again. And sure enough, them coyotes come right back into the clear cut. I managed to take one more down. And they all ran back towards the woods. But that rabbit kept screeching. I told George, I said, "They're running off. They're not, let it calm down a little bit." And he goes, "It won't shut up." I said, "What do you mean it won't shut up?" He says, "The bunny, it won't quit screeching." And it's kicking, and he's petting it and trying to hold on to it, and it's screeching and screeching. And he goes, "I don't know what in the world's wrong with it." He says, "It won't shut up." I totally lost interest in the coyotes. My interest was on this poor rabbit. Why is it still screeching? Well, George is holding it, and he reaches down to the bunny's tail. And he says, "Oh no," and he kind of quick pulls. And he's got that, and that bunny's screeching and screeching and screeching. He's got that bunny's tail in his hand. He had broken that bunny's tail off and actually tore the skin. And he just finished it by yanking it off. He pulled that rabbit's tail off. George just don't know his own strength. And he just does not know what it is to be humane to an animal. I told him, I said, "You put that rabbit back in that carrier and we're getting out of here." He stuffed that rabbit back in that carrier, and that poor rabbit was screeching, and we're hiking back towards the cabin. Them coyotes are coming out, and they're yipping and howling and freaking out. I turned around and fired a couple shots off in the air just to shut them up and to get them away from us, because they're trying to follow that wounded rabbit. Well, by the time we got to the cabin, the rabbit had quit screeching. I took the rabbit out of the cage and took a look at it, and I told him, I said, "George, that's terrible." He still had the bunny's tail. He had stuck it in his shirt pocket. And he goes, "I don't know what I'm going to do." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, look at it, I said, and this is the sad part. I mean, there was blood on the back of the bunny from it losing its tail." And he says, "I got to get this thing home and cleaned up." And he says, "and hope my sister doesn't notice." I said, "How in the world is she going to not notice Her rabbit doesn't have a tail anymore. How's she going to not notice that? And how do you explain it? How do you explain? Oh, the rabbit lost his tail overnight. I don't know how you're going to handle that, buddy. Well, he headed home with that poor rabbit. And I saw his little sister, 4 or 5 days later. And I mentioned to her, I said, I heard that something happened to your rabbit. She goes, yep. She said, my brother said that my rabbit got his tail caught in the cage, because they kept him in a big wire cage. And she said, got his tail caught and it tore his tail off. And I said, how's the bunny? She says, well, he seems to be fine now. Seems to be fine, but he doesn't have a tail anymore. And she said, and he doesn't like to be pet on his haunches at all. You can pet him everywhere, but to touch his butt, she says, he takes off. He'll claw you just to get away from you. She said, so it must have hurt him to have his tail broke off like that. I said, I bet it did. I bet it did. Well, then when I saw George later, I told George, I said, you're rotten to the core. I said, you shouldn't be allowed to have a pet. You shouldn't be allowed to hunt, fish. You shouldn't be allowed. You're the kind of person that just shouldn't be allowed. So, George, he had the coyote call that wouldn't quit. It just wouldn't quit. Sure brought in the coyotes, but boy, that's a bad way to do it. And then I got to thinking, how do they make these coyote calls, these wounded animal calls? Years later, a buddy of mine was using a predator call that had a recording of an injured rabbit. And that was it. That was that bunny. I heard it. That was that bunny. So how are they making these recordings? Is there some guy sitting in a room somewhere with high-end, high-tech microphones taking a rabbit by the tail and giving it a good twist? I sure hope not. But there you go. That's a rabbit hunting story, not a hunting rabbits story. Hey guys, I know that was a rough one. Thanks for watching. This is Ty saying, don't forget, do not forget. Up here, you can punch my ugly mug to subscribe. Over here, some videos to catch. Until the next one, you all have a very nice day. Bye-bye.